once again to the Dwarven Tavern. I am your host, Lyric, bringing you another review, and this is Lexi. And this time we are going to be doing Paulo Parente's Dust Adventure. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that name right, but it is called The Dust Adventures, done by Modifius Entertainment, or the Dust Studio, and it goes for $56.99. So, getting into it, this game is about World War II. It's actually like from that point on, and that's like the modern time of this game. However, this is not our 1947. This is a completely different one. This is what happens when Nazi Germany goes to Antarctica and finds an alien spacecraft with its pilot still alive inside, and the technology that they adapt from that experience. The very opening of the book is the map of the world laid out in that particular World War and what happens afterward. Actually, the World War is still continuing on in this game, where in our world it stopped at a certain point. It actually keeps going in this particular game. It actually lays out the entire timeline for you. Are you done? Bye. This actually lays out the entire timeline for you so that you can see it year for year, and then it has two different timelines. The first one is the war years, and then the second one is the timeline, each laid out more specific with more detail in those particular years. So, what has happened, reading from the back of the book, is the Second World War rages on and has spread across the globe. Weapons have advanced swiftly and strangely through the near-limitless power of the alien VK technology. Tanks have evolved into powerful combat walkers, rocket troops take to the skies, and the latest laser cannons, phasers, and Tesla weapons rule the battlefield. Which is pretty cool sounding. So, reading from Chapter 1, the timeline and introduction, VK is Vril Couture, which is most important thing, even to oil. It is the crystal that they have found in the alien spacecraft in Antarctica. They take this and they reverse engineer it to develop their own space, influenced technology, and that's where they get the walkers of the sort, which, when I was reading the timeline, I thought it was walkers as like the AT-ST of Star Wars, because that's my reference point. But, flipping forward, just to give you an idea of what this is, they actually look like, if you play MechWarrior Online, it actually plays very similar to that game. And this is also a game not just for role-playing, but it can also be used as a minifigure board game as well, which I thought was very cool. So, moving from the timeline, which is very similar to World War II, except there is minor details stemming from the spacecraft onward that eventually flow farther and farther away from each other. For example, Hitler dies 2 years before he does in our timeline, in this timeline. So, you just gotta read through that yourself. I won't get into it because it's a lot of information. So, Chapter 2 goes into character generation, and if you're using like D&D or Pathfinder or any other sort of role-playing game as a reference point, this is kind of more simplified. And what I mean is that instead of having the 6 stats of strength, dexterity, and so on and so forth, they have 4. And those are mobility, physique, mind, and presence. However, those 4 different core characteristics can be derived into different derived characteristics, and those are movement, capacity, and initiative, and those are the combinations of the previous 4. So, to select characteristics, you can have, instead of like for like Dungeons and Dragons where you have to roll 4 dice, sometimes 3, to get a set number, there are actually smaller numbers, instead of like being like up to 18 and then some. The biggest number that you can have is, I believe, 6. And a normal character cannot have more than 4. It says a normal human can never have more than a characteristic over 4. So, the numbers, as listed here, is 1 is average, 2 is heroic, 2 is standard, 3 is heroic. They kind of, it goes against itself here. because in the paragraph it says 2 is heroic, and then in the chart it says 2 is standard. So that's a little iffy. And then 6 or 5 is pulp, and 6 is legendary, and you can't go over 4, which that is not listed in this chart. Okay, so you don't go up to, 18 is the best that you can get as a starting out character on level 1 of, the average layout character, like in normal role-playing games. This is like you start out as 1 or 2, and then you build as you go, and very rarely do you actually build on these characteristics. That's cool, but at the same time I feel like the simplistic nature of this was almost too simplistic, too vague. I feel like it could use a little more definition. So, selecting the background and training packages are next, and what that means is that your character doesn't start out in the middle of the battlefield if fighting these walkers. They don't start out as a soldier. They have a background that they need to build on, and they actually give you background skills and backgrounds and so on and so forth that you can choose from. Each character has 4 individual things that they add to their background. The first one is the background or the package, which has a list of backgrounds that you can choose from, such as academic, urban/rural, or war zone. Then it also has a branch of service, which does not have to be militaristic and can be like scientist. And then 1 specialist package. And of course, if the GM, as listed here in this paragraph, wishes to have more experienced characters, they might be allowed to have 2nd specialist package. Normally that doesn't happen if you're playing a beginner campaign. So if you have experienced gamers who want to get more in depth with the character that they are creating, then dozo, go ahead and you can do that. So, then there are some character paths known as open packages permit a character to select a same package multiple times in different categories, such as picking scientist as a branch of service and specialist as an experience package, while other character paths are only selected once, which is most military packages and are limited to being picked once. So, I feel like that can get a little confusing if you don't really read into it, which is fine, but at the same time, if you're just looking at this, trying to start a campaign right off the bat, which doesn't normally happen, this could be a little overcomplicated, which is ironic because it seems to be simplified to make it easier. But anyway, backgrounds, as I mentioned before, academic, urban/rural, and war zone. And those 3 different ones, you are a student, a scholar, someone who's trying to, branch out educational wise. Then there's urban or rural. You could have lived in the suburbs all your life and you're working on, trying to, maybe if I actually read from the paragraph, that would help. You're familiar with more social stuff and have done a fair amount of physical labor than being like any sort of military-based background. While the war zone is pretty self-explanatory, your childhood and adult years were spent under fire, etc., etc. So the branches of service include adventurer, grenadier, ranger, scientist, and Soviet guard. That's pretty cool. And then it has with all of these, it has the listed details of your character, basically the table that you would find in order to roll up your character, like if you're playing D&D or Pathfinder. So, then it has specialist package. God damn it, that's the second time that's happened. Specialist package. This is developing your character even more. This is like a celebrity, drafted, which you can either be SSU volunteers or Volkssturm, which I'm guessing is German. A mechanic/inventor, medic, scout, war department, Draconi, I don't know what that is. Let's read it, shall we? Draconi commissionaires, which I'm probably pronouncing completely wrong, may opt not to take the weapon of choice of attack, so it doesn't actually give you a definition of what the character is, so that's fun. Experience packages, I thought I read that wrong, but I was actually right. Diplomat, gizmoteer, which means you tinker with stuff. Jump ranger, prisoner of war, super being, because with this real technology, VK technology, they're using that to amplify the natural human abilities. So you do have superhuman strength and stuff like that in this game. Then there are final touches, which is adding extra skills in your name, your rank, your serial number, and so on and so forth. Then there's character improvement, which is what your character can do to gain experience, what they can do to add to their 4 characteristics, and what they can do to amplify their character traits even more. Chapter 3 is skills, and luckily they lay it out all nice and neat for you in this little itty-bitty table down below. My favorite thing is tables. And it gives a little more definition to those things, like attack, which is melee, firearms, or gunnery, heavy, or thrown. Actually, there's 5, I almost said 4, but there's 5 different types of attack. And these, every one of these uses a prime characteristic and it lays it out for you, which is mobility is MB, physique is PH, mind is MD, and presence is PR. So that might be a little confusing if you don't look into it, but it does lay them out in the first chapter, or second chapter. First chapter is the timeline. So second chapter of character creation, it lays these things out for you all nice and neat. So you got to do a little bit of flipping, but you know, that's the best thing about having a book. So these have like the different skills such as athletics, attack, black ops, which is pretty cool, demolition, knowledge, medic, pilot, so on and so forth. These are to add your character's abilities even more detail so that your character can be even cooler. Chapter 4 is special abilities, and what those are is powers and skills that under ordinary circumstances a normal soldier or civilian cannot access. A character might possess a rare or powerful artifact or be trained assassin. That's cool. And those special abilities are things like assassin, of course, gizmoteer, they're lucky. They get a character ability that they can reroll every die that failed to score success in a die pool. So, I'm assuming that they can only roll it once, so if they keep failing, they can't just, oh, I failed again, I get to roll again. Then they have Berserk, Charge, Sniper, which is probably what I would roll up, a Special Power, which is listed in a different section of this chapter. So, what a special power is like flying, an enhanced characteristic, like sight, they get a +1 to whatever, physique that they choose. Eldritch energy, which is a character generates some form of energy and uses it for attacks. Also pretty cool. Gorilla. This character, the character is one of Kampfwaffe, experimental war apes used by the Axis. So it's a literal gorilla. This power is only available, this is a side note, this power is only available at the start of a campaign. Characters cannot buy this ability after their character generation, except under the most pulpy of scientific conditions. For example, Captain America getting all beefed up, that actually happened in the storyline and not, before the whole thing happened. So that can happen if you are some sort of lab rat and, you're part of the genetic mutation when it actually comes about. So again, touchy, ask your DM. Resurrection, telekinesis, vampiric drain, real magic. It's not real magic, it's just a alien technology that goes beyond our own. So, it's, something that's so far ahead of us in technology, it seems magical. You can even be a zombie if you want to be, which is pretty cool. And my favorite part about this whole thing, this whole character ability, is not the superhuman part where you get to be even better than an average character. It's the disadvantage. They actually include a section of this chapter where your character can be disabled in some way. They can have a flaw, and I absolutely adore that when a story or character creation ability has that defect. And these are things like fear or mental limitation, like they have some sort of mental, a learning disability. Physical limitation, like they have like a physical problem, like they're missing their leg or missing a finger, that, a trigger finger. or vulnerability, or they're even wanted, like they're a war criminal, which I wish this section was bigger. I would love to see more flaws brought into game, because I feel like you can't really have a full-fledged, fully rounded character until you develop their flaws too. So I give that, like, that's an extra lyric bonus point for for this book, is that they actually include stuff like that. So that's very cool. Chapter 5 is action, and this is what your character, or what your player does in order to actually play the game. This is like the difficulty of the test that they have, what it's like to, like, what do they do to determine die rolling. This is basically explaining just how to do this game. And it even includes things like rolling against the other characters. This game is not a turn-style game. I mean, it is, but you can act a lot quicker than, saying you have to wait your turn. You can be like, okay, well, I challenge what that guy's doing. I try to jump out in front of him before he shoots at my lady friend. So, again, very cool. And it does list that out. I'm not going to go into much detail about that, because that's just a bunch of rules. And I don't want to bore down this review with a bunch of explanation of rules, which you can just read yourself if you get the book. So they also have things like cover, motion, and range, close combat, which has defense and unarmed combat, damage, which includes both tank and armor vehicles, armor save, the like, asphyxiation, drowning and suffocation, falling, fear and insanity. That's something that I would like to get into. And then next part of this chapter goes into wounds, healing, and recovery, which it lines out like what you can do to either greater the wound or make it less. Like you can try to heal. So, and then another cool part of this chapter is character out of play. What to do if your character is not with the rest of the group. What to do if your character is passed the fuck out. What to do if your character is running away out of fear. It actually has a section specifically in here so that it avoids metagaming. Again, very cool. Then it has special abilities and weapon abilities. Special attacks and weapon abilities, which is like ammo and stuff. Incendiary weapons. Laser weapons. There's basically just a weapons part to the book. It has a section for movement, and then terrain and encumbrance and stuff that your character might run into when they are traveling, which is another big part of this book, because, what do you do when you're in and outside of a certain country and you need to get into the other one. Action points, which is, I think, what they use instead of experience points, because experience points is such a huge number more often than not, while action points is smaller in order to play along with this game even better, because this game is not just a role-playing game. You can use this as a board game as well. So action points is basically saying your character can do this when the normal game mechanics wouldn't necessarily allow it. So it has gaining action points and using action points, and then specific details of those things, like improving a die roll. Which, something I have noticed about this game, they say dice even for singular. So that bothers me on a very personal grammar level, and I can't stand it because they say the regular dice roll, and it just hurts me inside. Moving on to Chapter 6, it is gear and equipment, which I feel like Chapter 5 and Chapter 6 should be switched, because gear and equipment is still part of the character creation, while movement and that type of related stuff, action, I should say, is outside of character creation. Like, you still need gear and equipment to build your character, while action is what you do with your character once they're finished. So I feel like those two chapters should be switched, because it's like you're going in game and then all of a sudden you realize you don't have anything to your name. So, then again, this chapter seems to be all about creating stuff that your character might design on their own time. And that could be seen as an after step, but still, I still find it to be a little, disorganized, in my personal humble opinion. Then there are enhancements going inside the chapter. First, they start out with gizmos and gadgets and accessories, designing an item, character gizmos, vehicle gizmos, which I'm thinking they're saying gizmos as in like gadgets, but again, weird word choice, this weird layout. Enhancements like damage special, or the durability, the capacity, how you handle it. Then they have flaws, again, very cool, which is like they're high maintenance or bulky, like if we're talking about a weapon. Open topped, like if it's a vehicle, it's easier for you to get headshotted if you were in an open vehicle like that. Then there's a gizmo construction example, so if you're not sure about how to use that type of system, it actually lays it out for you. Very cool. And then example walkers constructed as gizmos, which that's getting into it a little more in depth than I want to. Then there is armor, which you can make yourself, and weapons, they all laying out for you, which I believe there's actually, flipping forward a little bit, there's actually a table which lays out all the weapons nice and neat for you so that you don't have to bother with all that in-depth description, which if you're trying to get a game going as fast as you possibly can, then they have this laid out for you. So these are the walkers that I keep mentioning. They are basically mech droids that you can pilot, basically walking tanks. Again, if you play MechWarrior Online like Taverneer Ian does, I feel like they would have a lot of fun with that aspect of the game. So, going on that same topic, Chapter 7 is vehicles, which is the different type of walkers, which is the Allied walkers, the Axis walkers, and the SSU walkers, which for those of you who don't know what SSU, it's the alliance between Russia and China. So, which I feel like they developed it more specifically with just Russia and China in this game than happened in real life. So they actually, moving to the next page, which I have to mention this too, this is very cool, they include the game as, like in the photos of this book, they have both artwork drawn and they also have snapshots of when they play this game via like minifigures, which is also an option that you can use. You don't have to play this as a role-playing game, you can play it as a board game, which is also very cool. And it does actually have a specific part in this book where you can look into it to see if you can have a compatible game via role-playing game to tabletop if you ever decide to make it a board game. So this is a vehicle table so that you can look at all the different walkers and tanks and stuff to use in-game if you want to make it a very high action-based game. And then it goes on to the next page as well. So, actually there's a lot of information with the walkers and the like, because this is a completely new aspect and never happened in our World War, but happened in theirs. Chapter 8 is what I was talking about. It's converting Dust Adventures from one type of game to another. It goes from board game to minifigure to role-playing game, and this is telling you how do you make one of these games turn into another. Are you playing the board game, but you want to make it a role-playing game so you don't need all the parts to it, or vice versa? This is the chapter that you would use to make that distinction. It's only 2 pages, so there's not a lot of rule bending, but some rules do need to be changed if you're playing a character rather than a little minifigure. So, Chapter 9 is the Nations of the War. This is just talking about the different places of the Axis, the Allies, and France. No, Axis, Allies, and the SSU. And it gives out actually specific characters that have bigger parts in the game than, you know, just side characters. And on top of that, it also gives specific points of these different parts, these different blocks of the war that have huge influence. Like, for example, the Allies, xenophobia in America, Hollywood and propaganda, and stuff like that. Moving on to Chapter 10, it goes into the 3 blocks in even more greater detail, and that is the Allies, the Axis, and the SSU, and the organizations they're in. And on top of that, it gives you characters that you can use in-game, like Captain Bazooka Joe Brown and his bazooka, which is a 40mm grenade launcher and his country's trusted M1911 45 pistol. So that's pretty cool. I love it when they give characters in the game so that you can use people that might have actually existed. Chapter 11 is running the Dust Adventures, and this is what the GM would use in order to run the campaign as best they could. It's basically a mini version of what the Dungeon Master's Guide would be in this game. This is like giving out specific rules, specific character types, typical missions that you can use, campaign seeds if you can't come up with anything off the top of your head about what your character is going to do. I love that about games that do that. Advice to game masters for those who are unsure or uncomfortable with being a game master, how they can do it to make it the best experience for everybody involved. And then chapter 12 is encounters and adversaries. There's a lot to this book. And this is like the Kampfwaffe, which is the Axis guerrillas, and how your characters can deal with those. Then it's like the Axis grenadiers, laser grenadiers, and the like, allies and their individual abilities and people. It also gives out character types that might come into play that aren't like specific people, like if you have mercenaries of the SSU, or you have Axis walkers who may have certain pilots. It also gives animal types, which is a very small part of the chapter. They're just basic animals, like an aggressive canine if you're in the middle of a war zone, and all of a sudden, dogs! There you go. And now you have to kill them in order to eat, or you will be eaten yourself. Then there is, since all this new alien technology came from Antarctica, it actually does include the access base in Antarctica, which is the basic overview and the stuff of that. And you can actually just make that your entire campaign. You can base it all off of the base in Antarctica. It actually gives you blueprints, so you can actually play in the base in Antarctica if you're fighting for like territory or whatever, and you decide that you're an allies and you're trying to take over that particular base, or you're an Axis person just trying to live day to day in the World War II of this world. Chapter 13 is travel and adventure. This is the explanation that I gave earlier about getting from one place to another. Illegal travel, illicit travel, types of travel, etc., etc. This gives you a more in-depth explanation of how to get through one country to another, especially if that country is an enemy country and your character is undercover or something of that sort. Then chapter 14 is a super science, archaeology, and parapsychology. This is things like super science or paranormal stuff, or things like alchemy or Area 51 or deciphering cave paintings even. This is things that don't necessarily fit into the descriptions of the book beforehand with all the technical historian stuff. This is going on to the more supernatural, the more paranatural, if you would, stuff. Things that don't necessarily exist, quote unquote, in the world. Like if you want to work with the hoodoo that she do, the voodoo. Then this has an entire chapter based off of that stuff. Like, for example, the Loch Ness Monster, or the ley lines, or the Holy Grail, even. If your character wants to do a little more of the supernatural stuff, if they want to do a little more of the biblical things, or even want to work with the real technology, they actually have a section in the book in which you can explore that a little bit more. Chapter 15 is Operation Apocalypse, your first mission, and this is this introductory adventure is designed to boot a campaign that continues in its own separate book. The encounters herein are wide variety, so as to allow the players and GMs a chance to see what parts they like best. It may be that your group is all about the combat and less about role-playing, and that's fine. You'll find plenty of opportunity to be in the thick of it here. So this is its own campaign on its own, which apparently expands into its own book, which is cool. That's very awesome. And the best part about this chapter is that it gives you NPCs. So like Cécile Cosino, Jonas Cosino, or French, Isla Sprecht, which is Dr. Sprecht, 11-year-old daughter. She was terminally ill before Sprecht, God, I can't even do my German accent anymore, treated her with a real DNA. Now she possesses the power to read people's pasts as well as their futures. That's pretty cool. this gives you like characters that you can use in-game that you would normally have to come up with on your own. So again, if you're trying to do a fast campaign, this would be your section of the book. And lastly, it gives you the character sheet, which is nice and concise on one page, and a lot of this detail is given out within the first chapter. So that is that. So that's it for that book. It can be played as a role-playing game, a mini game, like a minifigure game, and it can also be played as a board game, and it can have many different varieties on top of that. So as a role-playing game, because that's what I'm reviewing it as, I have to say this book has a lot of history in it. It even tells you the comparison. It doesn't just tell you the history of this book, but it also tells you how it deviates from our own world history. So if you're not that, if you don't have that much of a historian-based knowledge, this can actually help you learn a little bit about our own world, as well as the world of this particular scenario. So I do find that that's very cool, and I love the fact that they include flaws, not just with the character, but with the world around them, so that you can make it a nitty-gritty, hard-to-live-in society, and as dystopian as you want it to be, or in the midst of a war, and I love that. The only problem that I found with this book is it is a bit disorganized, and the grammar, it bothered me sometimes, so I cannot in my right mind give this a full score. I'm going to give it a high score because it is a pretty interesting book. It does teach you a lot, and it does have a lot of aspects to the changing of the World War to make it a little more sci-fi, a little more supernatural, a little more fantasy-based, which I personally love. And that being said, you can make this as realistic as possible. There's a lot of variety to this game. So, that being said, as cool as it is, as much as I love the flaws of it, there are flaws to the actual book, and that's the disorganization and I felt that it trying to be too simplistic made it a little too confusing. It made it trying to be simple and easy to understand actually made it too vague or a little more complicated and trying to make up for it. And like it's very ironic with the oversimplified, so therefore it became too complicated. And because of that, I'm going to give this book a 4 out of 5. That's still a pretty good score. I still would recommend it, and I feel like this is a book that you guys could definitely look into. I would like to see the minifigure game played out, and I'm pretty sure that they would have it on their website. So you can check this book out, The Dust Adventures. You can check them out at modifius.com. They are also doing the book called Achtung Cthulhu, which is in the Call of Cthulhu type scenario of the World War II, which is really, really cool, and I want to check that out as well. So, that is my review for The Dust Adventures. I give it a 4 out of 5. I feel like it's very educational, a little disorganized, but if you take the time to really study it, you could get a lot of good role-playing games out of this book. So, that is that, and I have been Lyric Owens of the Dwarven Tavern. If you have anything that you would like to add to this review, please comment below, or if you want us to review a book or a role-playing game or anything like that, please message us at www.dwarventavern.net. And on behalf of the entire cast and crew of the Dwarven Tavern, I am Lyric, once again, and we wish for you to want for nothing but adventure in this new year, and at first I feared it, then I charged. Thank you all for watching, and we will see you next time.